Hi, how's it going? This is Riz with Collinwood for YouTube, back with another video for you guys and gals. I am here to do a read-along of Benight, Beguile book, or continue read-along. Book 5, Chapter 3, When Shadows Gather. The fading night sky turned from a deep purple to lavender as the sun slowly began to peek up from the horizon. Baby Gabriel slept peacefully in his little crib with blankets in the same shade as the lighting sky outside his window. At his nursery door, a shapely figure in silhouette watched as he slept. The child, who could not hear the person even if they had made a sound, snuggled a small teddy bear that kept watch over him as it squished perfectly under the baby's arm. Shadowy figure, a woman, moved from the nursery door, into a small private hallway that connected a larger bedroom suite, Evie's room, suite. The figure in the shadow stepped into the room where Evie too slept peacefully before the sun brightened her window. The figure stood there in silence and watched Evie sleep. It was Jacqueline Gray, the witch from Highgrove, did nothing but watch Evie for several minutes. She thought about what she had done to the child by accident, but also that she had blamed Mary for it all, leading Sebastian to believe Mary had done it deliberately. It was all a devious and cruel plan of Jacqueline's to remove all of the potential obstacles in her way to have Sebastian all to herself. Mary, his closest confidant, came first. Mary was already weary of Jacqueline's relationship with Sebastian. Thus, Jacqueline made it seem like Mary was to blame for Gabriel's deafness, and only Mary. But it was only Mary. As Jacqueline watched Evie sleep, she saw a small photograph in a frame on a side table of Sebastian on a horse, obviously in happier times. She knew Evie still cared for him, although she believed him dead. Jacqueline worried that, like many secrets, that too would soon be exposed. Befriending Evie had given Jacqueline insight into everything she feared. She feared Mary would poison Sebastian on being with her. She feared the newly single Evie would discover the father of her son still alive and want to rekindle their relationship. She feared losing the man she had fallen so in love with so quickly. She had given up her life in Boston to be with him. She had given up everything she knew because she believed so much in the new love she had found when she had never actually expected it. She feared losing him and being alone forever. That could not happen. Jacqueline had one more trick up her sleeve to make sure Evie's mind focused on something that was not Sebastian. Jacqueline closed her eyes. She fell into a black, shapeless void in her mind. It was as if she was tunneling, burrowing into the ground further and further. She fell in the darkness until finally a peak of light flickered. She was now inside of Evie's mind, inside of a dream Evie was having. The dream of Evie sitting on the greenest grass Jacqueline had ever seen. She was there on a picnic with Gabriel. They were giggling, laughing together. A young man was coming up the small green hill. His face was obscured by the sunlight. Jacqueline tried to make it out, but she could not tell who it was. Jacqueline snapped her fingers and transported herself inside the dream to where the man was coming from, so that she could see his face clearly. It was Sebastian's face. Proof Evie was still thinking of him. Proof she dreamed of them being a family again. Dreamed of the three of them being together once more. But if I remember correctly, again, I could be old. I think Sebastian can enter dreams. I'd watch it if I was this lady. This could not be. Jacqueline took control of Evie's dream and morphed herself into the man coming up the hill. Then her powers changed Sebastian into Matthew. She was going to force Matthew into Evie's mind. He was the man she wanted Evie to dream about. As Jacqueline concealing as Jacqueline concealing herself as Matthew approached Evie. Evie in the dream began to cry. Matthew, is it you? Is it really you? Evie asked as the little boy cuddled in her arms. Hello, Evie, Jacqueline replied as Matthew. How are you here? Are you really here? Evie wondered, confused when seeing him in her dream. Find me, Evie. Find me and bring me home. Find you? What do you mean? I can't find you, Evie asked, her heart pounding in her dream. And in real life, she was frightened seeing him as alive in her dream. To Evie, she could see him so clearly, and usually the people in her dreams were more foggy, less visible, just images with no real life signs. But Jacqueline had made herself to be Matthew in very convincing and lifelike way. Skin, eyes, everything was as if he were standing in front of Evie in real life, not dead. It was perfect. She wanted Evie to believe him alive, believe Matthew was out in the world and not dead, to refocus her off of anything that would remind her of Sebastian. Find me, Evie. I did not drown. I'm alive. Please find me so that we can be together. We can be together again. Evie, find me. Leave Welshport. Find me, please. Matthew, I don't understand how that could be. We were told your ship sank. There was only one survivor. He said no one lived. Just him. Where do I go? Where would I search for you? She stood up, still holding her baby, as their picnic suddenly vanished in the dream. Now she was standing barefoot on the green grass. Leave this island and find me. You still know where to look if you think I am still alive. I can't leave, Matthew. Please tell me. Tell me where I can find you. Evie said, her eyes filling with water, ready to burst. I love you, Evie. Do you love me? Jacqueline asked Matthew. Evie's heart. I, I do, Matthew. I do love you, but I can't leave Gabriel to find you. Where are you? Evie replied, her heart torn in two. Evie, I need you to come and look for me. I'm waiting for you to find me so that we can be together forever. Jacqueline, as Matthew said, pushing for Evie to leave Welchport behind and come and find a man that died months ago in a storm at sea where there is no proof Matthew was alive. There was no evidence anyone except for the man that was found floating on the surface of the sea survived. But Jacqueline didn't care. She wanted Evie to leave and never turn back so that she could have Sebastian all to herself. Tell me where, Matthew, Evie screamed in her dream. Her scream woke her up just before Jacqueline could further manipulate the circumstances of the dream. Jacqueline, now outside of the dream, quickly hid in the fading morning shadows of Evie's room. Evie sat up in her bed, her long, honey brown hair messy and in slight curls from tossing and turning. She thought of Matthew. Had he really come to her in a dream to tell her he was alive? She wasn't sure what to believe, and how could she even entertain the idea that that was what happened? No, he can't be, Evie said to herself out loud in a hushed voice, but loud enough that the hidden Jacqueline could hear her. No, Evie said again, thinking herself silly for believing her dream was a true message from Matthew. Then from down a small private hall that adjoined Evie's room to Gabriel's nursery, she heard him cry. Evie, the doting mother, jumped out of her bed, slipping on a shining silk robe with golden rose embroidered at the bottom hem, and quickly made her way to her baby's room. Jacqueline made herself invisible and followed the new mother down the hall and into the baby's room. Evie was already in town, rocking her baby in a chair while she breastfed him. Jacqueline watched the beautiful Evie feed her baby as the morning light began to illuminate the nursery in the pink hues of the sky. She got close, so close to Evie while she was invisible, and Gabriel looked right at Jacqueline, dead in her eye, while he sucked. What are you looking at? Evie giggled. What's up there, huh? Evie asked, turning her head to see what the baby's gaze was so locked on. Evie only saw the top corner of the nursery ceiling. Gabriel saw the invisible Jacqueline. Jacqueline gulped. She couldn't believe the child could see her, but he did. Babies were innocent. They had not been jaded by the darkness and the pain of the world. They could see magic. Babies like Gabriel could see how things were meant to be hidden from those who were now consumed by the shadows that life often obscured. He smiled at Jacqueline, not realizing who she was, not realizing what she had done, and most of all, not realizing what she had planned for his mother's future. Jacqueline smiled back sinisterly. You're silly. There's nothing there. Then Evie wondered, was Matthew there? Was Matthew the one Gabriel was seeing in spirit form? Could it truly be some sort of message from Matthew? But the new mother shook her head. She was embarrassed to have even thought of such a silly thing. She knew better than to dive into those supernatural make-believe things that Rebecca was so in tune with. No, no, you're just happy to be with Mommy, aren't you, love? Yes, you are. You are so happy to be with Mommy, Evie said to her baby, who giggled, but still kept his little eyes on the invisible Jack, who fully planned on continuing to persuade Evie to leave Washport on a wild goose chase in search of Matthew. Jacqueline made up her mind she would infect her new friend Evie's dreams, pretending to Matthew over and over again until the fear of losing Sebastian to Evie was dead like Matthew. The fresh new winter snow became a cold, wet slush in the streets of the village as the day warmed. The small black cars puttered around the cobblestone streets hurriedly as people made their way through the village, going about their normal duties and errands. Philip Braga and a very pregnant Mary Good did the same. They were in Welshport village gathering items for the cabin back on Good Island. Mary, or sorry, while they walked back towards the docks, where they'd once again get into a small sailboat owned by Philip that would bring them back to their small home, a familiar face was closing and lock, locking the street's level door that led to her upstairs apartment just above her small little parlor. It was Fatima Braga, Philip's estranged aunt. She had seen her nephew over the years in the village. She had watched him. She had felt pride in the kind man he had grown up to be. She had worried for him when he was in his early 20s and worked for Jacob Lord as his personal page. She had mourned his parents when they died, especially her brother Philip's father. She had suffered sleepless nights when Philip became injured decades ago in the automobile accident at the hands of a drunk Jacob Lord. All these years she watched on the sidelines and never said anything to him. Their estrangement was this deep. That part. Let's see. She smiled again, her face tight with the icy cold touch of the sea wind. He was tall, handsome, his hair a warm chestnut brown, his skin an equally warm olive. A man that she felt so proud of, and yet she could not tell him to his face how loved he was. Mary turned slightly to adjust one of the bags she had slung over her arm, and her pregnant belly became visible to Fatima from under her long black coat. The estranged aunt gasped in delight. She had prayed her only nephew would one day have a child, and was sad when he and Celeste broke off their long love affair childless. But with Mary, a new hope it lit inside of Fatima's deep brown eyes. On their walk in the cold snow, Fatima stopped her and took her bag from her shoulder to ease the heft. I can't believe Jacqueline didn't come with us. She can't just sleep all day like Sebastian or something. Fatima, or Sir Philip grumbled about their new house guest. She came last week on her own. Philip does her part, I think. She does her part, I think, Mary defended to Philip's surprise. Does she? He asked, annoyed with the every growing caution in his mind about Jacqueline. Mary smiled at him. He was so cute to worry, but she knew he was right. Jacqueline was something to worry about. She knew that much. The new witch's penchant for going rogue on her plans was what she worried most about. The pair, not knowing she had already implicated Mary as the mastermind behind the terrible thing that happened to Gabriel, to remove any blowback from Sebastian on her. Then, as the two chatted from across the street, Philip and his aunt Fatima made eye contact. Fatima had not seen his full face in so many years after their estrangement. She was caught off guard at first. almost as if she thought she was invisible in the light that reflected off the snow and into the air all around the street. The cars buzzed past, and through their quick rush down the street, Philip recognized her and stared back at her almost as if he was trying to freeze her face in his brain, his only living relative. She had seen him over the years, but he had never once seen her. This was the first time in almost 25 years, despite the village being so small. Fatima smiled. She meekly lifted her hand to wave. He lifted a brow and turned away back to Mary, who noticed the woman's hand way up. Who's that? Mary asked. No one, he replied. She waved, Mary pointed out. She's no one, he replied again, his voice as cold as the wind. Philip, she's clearly someone. She waved at you. Do you know her? Mary asked. No, well, yes, but not anymore. Well, then, who was she? Mary asked, quickly learning his word game. Philip turned again to Fatima, who had replaced her waving hand under the thick wool shawl. She shivered in place just outside of her own home. The snow once again began to fall in small flakes, so delicate they practically melted midair, even though the air was just as frosty. Come, we need to get back to good before the snow comes down thicker, Philip replied. Mary caressed her big belly as they walked, her load of packages much lighter than that. Philip took more on. So you're not going to tell me? She asked. He looked at her and sighed, his warm breath freezing in the air and forming a white cloud that floated off into nothing. My father's sister, Mata, my tia Fatima, Philip replied using the Portuguese word for aunt. Mary stopped in her tracks, deep in the snow. What? Your aunt? Mary replied excitedly. Mary, we should go, please, he said. Mary had no idea he had family in the village. She believed, after his parents both died, that he was the last of the Braga family on Welshport Island, and that everyone else was either back in Portugal or in Angola, where his other family members lived. She never really asked. It was all just speculation on her part, because Philip liked to keep his family past private, but in truth, Philip didn't have much family to speak of. He was an only child. His father had only one sister, Fatima, whose child lived far away, and Philip's mother was an only child. Mary turned back to see Fatima still staring at the couple and smiled sweetly at her. Fatima watched them walk all the way down the street that led to the docks. As she did, something strange occurred right in Fatima's eyeline, a shadow, something dark that no one could see, and Fatima began to form from the shadows of the trees on the street from the early morning winter sun. The shadows crawled along the snowy street, following Philip and Mary. They were harmless to the living, but Fatima gasped and stepped into the street after Philip and Mary was almost hit by a car that honked its horn at her. The shadows continued to collect as Philip and Mary walked further down the streets towards the docks, forming a large black blob behind the couple. Fatima reached the pocket of her coat and grabbed a crystal tied to a silver necklace and carried around her neck for peace and safety. She knew what the shadows were doing. They were why they were she was seeing them follow Philip and Mary. She knew why they showed themselves to her, and only her. It was a warning from the spirit world, and Fatima knew that danger would not only Philip and Mary, but for all on Welshport was imminent. She knew darkness was coming once again. God help us, she said to herself, her powerful psychic abilities only allowing her to see, but do nothing to fix the coming danger. At Lord Publishing House in the village, Jacob sorted through several papers and documents. His work consisted of being the main publisher of several newspapers in the local area, including New York City, Bangor, Philadelphia, and Augusta. Along with the newspaper publishing, the Lord family business was also responsible for publishing novels from high profile authors all around the world. The business was incredibly successful and made their family millions and millions of dollars a year. Becca, who was head of the company when her husband Albert died, was in charge of the day to day business. She would often work from home. But now that Jacob had taken control of everything, he had lawyers smart enough to rule the world, render Rebecca insane, and her admission to a mental ward at Welshport Hope helped. Jacob obviously took full advantage of his mother's recent mental breakdown. Now the company was his to rule, and not much would break the power of the documents he filed in court to retain this. Jacob signed off on documents and then picked up a stack of manuscripts his literary agents had sent over his approval with one wave of a pen, marking his initials on the cover of the manuscript. The book would be made under Lord Publishing. Any good news, Celeste said, walking into Jacob's office in her dark blue dress, with her shawl curled around her body, holding in her warmth. Her nose was pink at the tip, a small sign of the frosty outdoors she just came in from. I haven't read them yet. I'll get to it, he replied. I don't think I've ever seen you read a full novel, much one of these, Celeste joked as she picked up one of the unpublished works of Lead of the Fledgling. She added, read to the title. Sounds like something I know, Jacob said, pointing his chin out of a shaded office window into a busy room filled with literal agents sorting through the thousands of manuscripts mailed and hoping to be published. He was referring to Jonathan, Celeste's half brother, who was eager to get his stake in the Lord family business. You promised him a job, and obviously he's here to take up that promise. What would you What have you found for him? Celeste wondered. What am I supposed to do? Just place him in any department? He doesn't have any experience in this line of work, Celeste. We need someone who's willing to go the extra mile and work hard for this art form. I don't want this company publishing penny savers and books and how to garden, Jacob grumbled. You promised, she said. Well, it doesn't really matter. He doesn't seem to even care about experience or not. Look at him out there. He's getting more and more used to calling himself Lord. Their, their ecstatic new fresh face, a new son of Albert, I suppose an ally is an ally, no matter who he is, Jacob added. You sound jealous, Celeste said, smiling girlishly at her husband. Jacob rolled his eyes at her. It doesn't matter as long as you give him something to do, something official. He'll get off your back, and you don't have to worry about any kind of coup. No one wants to replace you, Jacob, and no one wants to push that envelope in getting you replaced, Celeste explained. Is that so? Not even you? He wondered of his wife, who was showing more and more signs of her cunning ways. Of course not. Your success is my success, and our success is the success of our son. Fabian is my main concern. I want you to be successful. So when it is his turn to lead this company, he'll have it all because he's your son, she said. Jacob lifted a brow and rolled his desk chair back to a thick black box made of the darkest wood that Tamworth Forest grew. He reached for a golden key inside the tiny pocket of his gray vest and pulled it on its red string. Celeste watched him open the box and remove a paper. It slid it across the table in Celeste's direction. And this, she wondered, not wanting to touch anything that could incriminate her and her husband's penchant for blackmail and framing. Read it, he said. She would not. What is it? She asked again, annoyed. Gabriel, you're worried about making sure our son gets his inheritance. His part of the company, well, he'll have a little trouble doing that with the competition, Jacob said. Who's Charlotte? She won't be interested in this. She won't be interested in this place. You know she is. She'd rather travel the world and follow her heart in helping people. No, Fabian won't have to worry about her. She's going to be some kind of doctor or nurse or teacher, Celeste replied confidently. Not Charlotte, Gabriel. Celeste looked confused and finally leaned over the large oak desk and peeked out the form Jacob had slipped to her. It was a copy of Rebecca's will. She had left things to her sons, and their sons were dead. To their sons, and if their sons were dead, to their sons. Gabriel's father, Sebastian, and grandfather, David, were both legally dead. That meant Rebecca was so locked away at the hospital, was dethroned as head of the company, as Jacob wished, and her sons were in charge, Jacob and David's heirs. Since David was supposedly dead and Sebastian was subsequently dead, that meant the little Gabriel was Jacob's co-owner, and since he was only months old, Evie would stand in his place. Evie controls half of this company, but she doesn't know it, Jacob said. She can't know that, Celeste replied, surprising Jacob. Well, I mean, she has so much going on. Jacob smiled evilly, seeing more of Celeste's wicked side, even though she tried to hide it. Well, we have a lot of this discuss then, dear wife. Our brother Jonathan, who certainly would contest this if he were to know, since he is also biologically Albert's son, and Evie's too. And Evie too, she too, should she get any idea this, it could throw us all into a tailspin and put us right back where we started. Celeste's face turned, her brow furrowed. Her son was all she cared about. She didn't want him to lose anything she felt was his by inheritance. She wanted him to be the one who inherited everything that was by his blood. But now things were once again murky, and the power within the family was split all over again. She his thought his was over. She thought she could keep Jonathan in line by dangling a sweet job at the publishing house. She thought she could just keep adding Jacob aiding Jacob in his attempt to usurp his mother, and that things would be fine. She never realized how any legal obstacles would come and how she'd overcome them. It was a spider's web of paperwork and wills and forms and laws, and it was overwhelming someone who only wanted what was best for their child. So what do? She asked. How much do you want, Jonathan? Here, he asked. Here, where? At the company? In a job? She asked. Jacob shrugged. That's what I always wanted. Is that you're talking about? She asked. Here at the company, or he paused. Anywhere? Jacob said cryptically. Anywhere. I don't know what you're asking me, she said, nervous, but clearly avoiding the subject she actually did know. I think you do, Jacob replied. This is the name of the game. If we want all of our dreams to come true, we have to make some smart and at times painful decisions about our family members. This is how it works, Celeste. I need you to know you're on I need to know you're on board, he added. On board of what? She shouted then quickly, lowering her voice as Jonathan outside noticed. On board. Of what? She said again in a low voice. Jacob lifted his head, Celeste. Or sorry, tilted his head. Celeste, it's our future. Jacob, listen to me. If you're saying that you and I should do something to Jonathan and Gabriel, something that would hurt them, obviously not. Do you hear me? Absolutely not. She exclaimed. I never said anything that would physically harm them. No, I'm done with that. We do a lot with our power. Look at my mother. She's alive, isn't she? But she's taken care of. I don't have to worry about her. She's as legally sane as a bag of nuts. Celeste inhaled and exhaled happily. She did not want to plot anyone's murder. Then what? She asked. Jacob snapped, his teeth crooked and hungry for power. All the power he could muster and steal and use to his advantage to gain more power and more money and rule. All the power he could muster and steal and use to his advantage to gain more power and more money and rule everything he wanted to make all his dreams come true, to make all his wife's dreams come true, to make his son's dreams come true once he was old enough. His greed had not faded with time or with the shocking events of the past. His attempted murder, his temporary memory loss, his involvement in Caspian's exorcism, finding his mother insane at the lighthouse, and seeing his nephew Sebastian alive when he thought he was dead. None of that had softened Jacob, and in fact, it made him even more dangerous, as suddenly seemed unstoppable. What was even more surprising that it was now bleeding over into Celeste's personality. She too was becoming a small version of him because she saw the benefits of being his wife, the benefits of power, the benefits of being the head of Mrs. Lord at Terramore. Newfound fame in the village gave her new life. The perks were intoxicating. She never wanted it to end. She wanted it for herself and her son. Gone were the days of being governess to the rich or the newest princess of the family's lady in waiting. Why don't you worry about making Jonathan stays in line and I worry about what to do with our new rivals once it's all set? I'll fill you in, Jacob said. I don't want bloodshed, she said. He nodded his head no. Jacob, I'm serious. No one dies. Not Jonathan, not Evie, and certainly not Gabriel. Is that clear? She demanded. Yes, ma'am, Jacob smiled. Whatever we're doing, whatever the plan you come up with, I want it to benefit our son. He's the most important thing in my life, and I want his future to be clean of blood, no death. He's going to be a success, Jacob. And once you set him up with his future, he'll pick up your reins and make us both very proud, Celeste said. I've no doubt of that, Jacob said as he came around his desk and grabbed her by the elbows and pulled her in close, their bodies intense with lust. She stared up at him, much taller husband, her eyes locking, his broad shoulders blocking out the light from the window behind him, making him look so much bigger than he was. His neck craned and lowered his head so that their lips would touch. Their kiss was filled with passion, although at times she could not stand him. She did feel love. At least she thought it was love. It was what came from the pressures of forcing herself to love a man that she could not stand for decades. It was what she had to do to survive. Celeste's love for Jacob was one of necessity, but at the same time, her heart would weaken with his touch. Together, they were the perfect match, both needing outside influences to truly feel seen and appreciated. One thing about Celeste was true. She was proud of herself and all she accomplished, and now she was at the place in her life where she'd do anything to keep what she felt she was earned after years and years of being a woman behind the scenes. As Jacob felt the rushing of his blood as her touch when she raised her hand and placed them on his cheeks while they kissed, they knew too that she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. Jacob would keep his promise of not shedding any blood, while making sure his hold all the money, assessed power, prestige, and practical immunity, many legal repercussions being a member of the Lord family gave him. He had designed it this way. After all, he was now legally the only Lord in power. If things were to go off rails, as things could often do in Welshport, and someone were to meet an accidental death, that would increase the level of ultimate power and control he had already. Well, in Jacob's world, that was just the risk he was willing to take. After all, accidents happen. Genevieve stood on the front steps of Terramore House in the cold winter air. Her hands trembled as she stood there with several suitcases at her feet. A family car driven by Aaron Hampstead, the Lord family's chauffeur, swirled around the circle driveway in the slush of the fresh snow, and parked at the bottom of the limestone steps. He got out of the car and quickly came around to the opposite side and stood by the back, waiting Genevieve's signal to open it. Then the front door squeaked open. Bundled up in his winter's jacket and a scarf came her son Morgan. Genevieve was about to set herself on a long journey in search of David Ward, the man she suddenly fell in love with and knew in her heart of hearts was alive. These passionate feelings were adopted by her as the spirit of Sabrina Lord, David's late wife, now inside of Genevieve herself. Morgan's eyes were filled with water, swollen with tears he had shed before stepping outside. I don't want you to go, he sniffled. She patted him on the head and lifted his chin up with her gloved hands so that their eyes met. I promised you I'd return, and I will, but Mamma has to do this, she said. He nodded, showing he understood. How will you know for sure where he is in London? Morgan asked of Genevieve's hunch of David's location. I can't really explain why, but I can sense it. David's in London, she added. Then, like a bright blonde angel passing into light, Charlotte came out of the house to say goodbye, too. She and Morgan were only months apart, her being the elder 14-year-old, looked at Genevieve and smiled. She saw her Aunt Sabrina's face and could tell her aunt was not only the force behind the decision, but the most likely the voice speaking. Goodbye, Charlotte, Genevieve said, patting the young Lord heir's shoulder. London, Charlotte said as she closed her eyes. The sky suddenly turned gray with clouds. A soft, icy breeze shifted through the trees of the Terramore forest. Aaron gulped, not understanding the sudden change of weather. We should go, miss, he said to Genevieve as he tapped on the car. London, Charlotte said, her eyes still closed, the breeze still freezing something it touched. Charlotte, Morgan said, seeing his new friend seem a bit strange. Uncle David, Charlotte whispered. London, she said. Why does she keep saying that? Morgan said. Miss, we should go, Aaron Hempstead said again, beginning to show his frustration for a woman he did not work for but was helping only by giving her a ride. Genevieve knew what Charlotte was doing. Thanks to Sabrina, Sabrina's thought and Genevieve's thoughts were now one, and Sabrina knew Charlotte's psychic abilities were working right in front of them. The young girl was calling all the powers of nature that surrounded them, the spirits of the wild wind, the cool air of the earth, the ghosts that lived in the other world that knew all. She was calling on them in her mind and asking them to prove to them once and for all if David was truly alive in London, England. Tell me, Genevieve said, focusing on Charlotte. What did you see? Charlotte's eyes snapped open, startling Morgan, who stepped back in the crunchy snow. You'll need to look very deep within the city walls. He's there. He's there, but he's not the same. I can't see him the way I saw him when he lived here. But after all these years, Uncle David is in London. But there is something I don't understand. I don't see him the way he was when he lived here. Charlotte explained, repeating herself slightly as if saying over again might shed light over her conversation. What does that mean? Morgan asked. Does he look different? Genevieve wondered. Maybe he just seems different too. Uncle David is quieter. He's stranger. He hides. He's always hiding, but not like mixing with the crowd, but in a way that is very strange. He only sees the sun when he's allowed to, or when he's given the opportunity. He fights. He's always fighting. Charlotte said, confusing everyone. As you want to do this, are you sure you want to do this? Morgan asked his mother. Now that there was some sort of mysterious mystery surrounding David. I think he's hiding because of what happened to me. I mean Sabrina, Genevieve said. He's hiding because the truth is still in a secret that I don't find him and bring him back. He will always stay this way. I'll hide. He'll hide, forever, thinking he did something he didn't do, Genevieve explained. My father did something very bad, Charlotte said, her voice meek and sweet, worried about the truth coming out about how Jacob, her father, was the one who framed David for Sabrina's death. But it has to be done. It has to be told because Uncle David deserves that. Charlotte then grabbed Genevieve's hand and squeezed. Aunt Sabrina deserves that. Genevieve smiled, but it was Sabrina's love that shined through. The two, Sabrina and Charlotte, were once one too. They lived this way for many years. Charlotte knew the fear inside of Sabrina, and the hopes she always had it, finally getting her husband back. By posing, Charlotte made that possible. She is just a girl. Charlotte knew the fear inside of Sabrina and hoped she always had it, finally getting her husband back by possessing Charlotte made that possible. Okay, I read that part. Being inside of Genevieve made her final wish to be free David of his guilty conscience. Much more of reality as Genevieve was an adult. They could do Sabrina's bidding. Not to mention their smaller appearance made it even more justified. Thank you, Genevieve replied to her. Then she turned to Morgan. I promise I'll be back. You hear me? She said to him. He nodded. I love you, Morgan, she added. He lunged at her and held her body to his. He squeezed tightly, almost not wanting to let go. He loved his mother so much. They had been through the things together that no mother and son should have to face. Saying goodbye to her again after only a few weeks of reunion was gut wrenching. It tore at the young man's heart, but it equally tore at Genevieve's. She feared failure, but feared too that if she did not do this, she would be haunted all her life of what could have been. Miss Aaron, Miss Aaron said from the bottom of the front steps, let's go. The ship sets sail from here in an hour, and you'll need enough time to register to board, he said. Thank you, Aaron. Genevieve said, good luck, Charlotte, with the twinkle in her eye. I love you, Morgan said to his mother, who kissed him on both cheeks. I love you, she replied, to take care of each other. Do you understand? Listen to Jonathan, who promised to watch over you for me. He's been very kind on that aspect, Genevieve explained. I will, Morgan sniffled. When I get back, I want to hear how you both watched out for each other and were there for each other, cared for each other. Clear? Charlotte and Morgan smiled and looked at each other. They knew they were best friends and they would do as she asked. Genevieve got some help with her suitcases, and Aaron opened the back door to the car. He packed her up and began their way down the circle driveway, slushing along down with the pebbles crushing under wet wheels of the car. Genevieve turned back to look out the small black window of the car. It was foggy up from the heat of two people inside. She reached up and cleaned the condensation from the glass and saw Morgan and Charlotte still on the front steps. He in his dark cloaks and she in her dark coats and banquet bonnet covering her blonde hair. They stood there, the pair of 13-year-olds, and waved until she was no longer see them. They could no longer see the car. Then a single tear fell down Genevieve's soft peach-toned skin. Her heart sank watching her little boy stand there far away from her. Her heart sank and ached. She suddenly burst into tears alone in the back seat. We can turn back, Aaron said from the front. Keep driving, Genevieve said through tears. I have to do this. You don't, Aaron replied, but he did not stop. He kept driving through her sobs. She'll be okay, Charlotte told Morgan. Do you really think so? London is so far away. What if she never finds him? He wondered. She'll find him, Charlotte replied confidently. How do you do that? How did you know that your uncle was in London? My mother told me he was last night, but you say it too. How do you know that? Morgan said. I can see him, or at least it looks like him. It looks like I have these dreams in my mind, and a lot of times those dreams are real, or they come true, or I see it before it happens, something like that. Other times, if I concentrate hard enough, sort of like when we read books and we concentrate on the words, we can see the story come to life in our head. When do I do that? I can see what's happening somewhere else, like it's happening right in front of me. Charlotte explained of her psychic abilities. Does your father and stepmother know? Morgan wondered. Sort of. They have an idea of it, but they don't really bother me about it. I don't really know if they'd believe me to tell you the truth. Charlotte explained what saddened that her father Jacob didn't take an interest in her life. I believe you, Morgan said to her surprise. I really do. Charlotte smiled and grabbed his hand and squeezed. Thank you. As they stood there in a cold, the snow began to fall again, and the two new best friends ventured Terramore set to begin their schoolwork. Later that afternoon, in the frozen gardens between Welshport Hope Hospital and a separate building known as Churchill Green, Dr. Ashia Hoffman sat and read from a medical book. Her warm skin felt the cool winter air swirling around her. As she read, she sniffled and skipped the chapter in the book that she did not need. She alone with Nick Jordan were both new doctors and were still learning on the job. She wanted to focus on infections and strange occurrences of the body, where Nick was focused on psychology with a small dabble in bodily medicine. As she read, the door from the hospital opened and a nurse stepped out into the cold and pointed a man towards where she was sitting. It was her old friend, Constable Gregor Rains. Doctor, you should be inside. You'll catch a cold out here, he said. She grinned and stood up from her book and hugged her friend. It had been a few weeks since they'd seen each other. She had missed their chats after her ordeal with Andrew Kim and the situation with Alice. They regarded each other more like brother and sister from different parents. What are you doing here? She asked. I need to talk to you about something, and it's something I need to keep between us. Something is very concerning, Rin said. Is it about a case? She asked something she asked, thinking it had something to do with the law as he was constable. No, not in the way you're thinking, actually, and not in the way it's about Aurora, he replied. Aurora? Evie's mother? What is it? As you know, I'm sure she's been coming to the hospital to see Dr. Ward because she's with a child that was conceived under very Rain's paused, unsure of how to describe Aurora's involvement with the evil biological father of her unborn child. I think she should. I think I should choose my words carefully. I know part of what happened. You don't have to say anything you don't want to. I know that's all been very traumatic for everyone, as she has said. Is that I is so? What is it I can do? Gregory looked around to see if there were any others outside enjoying the fresh winter air. On a break, like Ashia was, one person was out on the other side of the garden close to the Churchill Green, sitting on a bench smoking far from earshot. Rains looked nervous. He wrinkled his cold hands and blew them into it to send some warm breath in hopes to melt the cold on his bones. I need your help with something that may shock you, but I've thought about this long and hard, and there's really no other choice, Reed said. Gregory, what is it? What is it you think I can do? She asked. She folded the medical book she was reading and placed it on her lap. So she turned so she was face to face with Gregory and looked him square in the eyes. His face was tired, and he was thinking of what he was going to tell Ashia for weeks, and he dreaded this moment. But he had to. When Aurora goes into labor, I need your help, Gregory said before she interrupted. Oh, if that's it, of course, I'd be happy to be there and he helped deliver Aurora's child. She smiled. And then I need you to take it. As she had smiled, quickly vanished. Take it? Take it where? Why? As she had listened to me, the child she's carrying is something born from a horrible event in our lives. Its father is a monster, a true monster. When she gives birth, I don't want her to see it. I don't want her to know it lived. I want her to think that the child suddenly died, and by doing this, she'll be free of the horrible memory of the baby's conception. Gerger explained in a quick, sudden spill of his plans. You can't be serious, she replied in shock. I can't lie to her, Gregory. I took an oath to not hurt a single patient in my care. If I'm there delivering a raw child and I lie and I say if the baby died and take it, what does that even mean? I would be caring for her. I'd be deceiving her, and even where would I even take the baby? You have to do this for us. She can never know the truth, and I promise you, you'll be you'll be in debt to I'll be in debt for you to the rest of your life. I'd even let go of the debt you owe me. Well, in fact, if you say that helping me do this will erase what I did for you. Gerber replied. As she lifted a brow, her eyes went blank when she remembered Rains helped her put away Andrew Kim, the doctor she had worked for in part, the same doctor that used horrible medical procedures to distort and hurt her father, a maniac man that was in his case at Wincliffe Sanitarium on the mainland. She got Rains to lie and say that Dr. Andrew was the one who shot Jacob Lord and Christian Evans. She was able to get revenge for her father by getting Rains to lie for her. Rains knew she lied. He knew that there had been much more to the story, but in the end, Rains needed to shooting case pretend as she, and pretend as his story was the truth. Both got what they wanted, but even then Rains had the upper hand. He could easily say that if she had untruthful to him and falsified the evidence and pull her into the mall that was a giant lie, and he'd be off scot free. But he chose to help her, and now that he was calling in the favor for himself, I don't know what she paused when he grabbed her arm. You and I both know the truth about Andrew Kim. Let's not pretend. It's over. The part is over. But I can undo all of that. And no, and then your own future may be in jeopardy, Ashia. I don't think you deserve that. You deserve peace you have found. And Kim was a grotesque man for what he did to your father, and even to Christian. So he's getting what he deserved. But I can still use what I know against you, too. But I won't. If you help me, I'll keep the past the past. If you help me with my future with Aurora, Rain said quietly as the nurse passed them as she was on her way to the man across the garden to meet for lunch. I can't be involved in all things like this, Gregory. You know how much I've already suffered and how much I've lost. I keep things for Nick. Not too long ago, I almost lost him. How can I do something to his own mother, even if, and I think things will be fine if Nick were to find out that I took his half sibling away and pretended it dead. My God, he'd never trust me again. I'd lose him for sure, she explained. He'll never know. She I swear it. He will never know, and in fact, he'll be relieved, Evie too. They don't want this kid in their lives as much as anyone knowing the baby is somewhere else, wherever far away from Aurora. That will be better. I promise he'll never ever know, Gregory said. You're asking me to do something. She goes against everything I believe in, she replied. You've lied before to me, to the law, to Nick. And for what? To protect. You were protecting your father's memory, and even though he was a horrible man too, he didn't deserve what Andrew Kim did to him. Now we need your help, or needs your help. The baby won't be loved. He is only a tragic symbol. Caspian raped Aurora. How do you think it will feel for her to look at that child every day? Rain said. We don't want we don't know any of that. It's not the baby's fault who the father is, she said. But it was, but it will be our fault for how Aurora treats it cruelly, coldly, unloved. You don't want that for the baby, do you, Gregor? Are you listening? Aurora is a kind, wonderful person. She's had two children who are loving and sweet. They're kind too. She would raise this baby just like she raised Evie and Nick. She would never be cruel to it. We would never. We have to give her a chance, she replied, her breath puffing cold clouds into the air. I'm coming to only ask for one more time and remind you that I can reopen the case against Andrew. I'll do it. I want to do it. I don't want to do it, but I will, Gregory said. Please help me. As she looked at the hospital in front of her, a beautiful white building with brick walls with large white pillars. It looked like a palace where people came to heal, to feel better, to feel safe and cared for, as she had worked so hard with Nicholas to become a doctor and to learn on the job program after years of being a nurse. She wondered what would happen to her career if she agreed to Rain's plan and got caught. She wondered what Nick would do if he'd ever find out. How he would leave her once and for all. How she'd not only lose their job, the love of their life, and possibly her freedom. Brains was holding something very damning over her. Either way, she would go to prison. She'd be exposed, so she'd had better chance of working with Rains than against him. I don't want her to know. Do you understand me? If she ever finds out, she'd have to lie for me, and I'd had to do with it. You have to say it was all you, that I had nothing, absolutely nothing to do with it, as she had demanded. So you'll help me? Rains asked. She did not say a word. She only nodded yes. Thank you. Thank you. I promise this will be our secret. And when the child comes, we'll deal with where it will go. After that, to be better home, to a home where it can be safe and away from its horrible past. This will be good for the baby too. Trust me, knowing where it came from, its parentage would only hurt the child as it grew. Being with a family that never knew the circumstances it was born into and given in a happier, loving home. That's true kindness, Rain said, smiling. As Shea didn't smile back, she was adopted too. She was born of a man who was a monster, a killer, a man who ate his victims and had killed men. She was raised with the Hoffman family, a good, strong family that gave her all the gifts in the world a child would need to succeed in life. Love, education, support, but she did not escape her dark past. She eventually discovered who her father was, a killer, a monster, a devious human. It haunted her in every day. After her discovery, she knew that wherever this child Aurora and Cassian's child ended it up, no happy no happy good upbringing could keep the secret of where it came from. The truth, the real ugly truth, always found its way back to where it was born. Ashia and this child had that in common. She couldn't help feel like perhaps this same situation happened to Ashia's own birth mother, who she never knew what that is was how the Hoffmans were able to adopt her. Her own past suddenly playing out in front of her. She knew now a part of the same conspiracy of secret adoption that her own birth had been shrouded in. Rain stood up from the cold bench in the garden on the hospital grounds and told us he had to get back to the constable's office. He had work to do. He had been in touch with her when the time came to Aurora to give birth. Again, she did not reply in words, only nodding in agreement. Rains walked off back in the hospital and kept looking back at his hands hidden in the pockets of his thick black wool as she continued counted him looking back at her 3 times before he finally re-entered the hospital. She looked down at the book on her lap and saw 3 drops of water to the brown cover on the triangle form. It was tears as she was crying and hadn't even noticed. She was terrified, heartbroken, and worried. Yet another secret and tragedy pulling her in like an anchor to a ship. At night, as night came to Welshport and Good Islands, the newly birthed winter frosted over everything. The air touched, ice formed on the edge of the village rooftops, smoke bellowed from almost every chimney in town. Every street was a river of perfect white snow, and people in their beds used practically every blanket they owned. In their bed at Terramore, Evie tossed and turned in her warm, large bed, her eyes tightly shut and her mind lost in the world. What in normal circumstances was fantastical and imaginary and almost pleasing, a dream world of whatever person would design in her head as they slept. But those dreams were gone, long gone for Evie Jordan. She was having yet another nightmare, and this one was being caused through the Terramore forest, lost in the dark woods that surrounded the mansion of the same name. She ran through the thick brush of the woods, panicking as she searched in vain for the crying child that she heard. It was Gabriel that was crying. All mothers knew the cry of their own child, but she could not find him. She could only hear him. She tried and pushed back brush and tree after brush and tree, and it did was lead her deeper into the dark woods of Caramel Forest. Then, as she continued to push on, she saw someone standing in the shadows. "Who's there? What do you want? Where is my child?" she asked the figure, her voice echoing to the night. "Find me," the person replied. This dark figure in the shadows in the forest stepped forward into a foggy bog, into the beam of the moon. A face slowly formed in the face of Matthew Winterbourne. Evie gasped, seeing her late fiance once again. "Matthew," she screamed as she rushed toward him. But as she got closer, Matthew's body went backwards. She'd step close to reach him. His body would float back 2 more steps. She find she reached finally and grabbed hold of his jacket, but then he disappeared, and the forest around her vanished, turned into the edge of a cliff on the nut or shore of Welshport. Evie stood on the edge, as the very tips of her bare feet seemed to flex and grab on to the very edge of the cliff. She watched around to start to break apart under her feet to fall down onto the crashing black waves below. Evie screamed and turned to see Matthew again behind her. His face turned, smiled as he said her again, oddly, "Save me." Evie's body was then jolted by Matthew. When he pushed her off the cliff, she screamed as her body fell down towards the crashing waves below. Cold body felt that the wind, wild wind on her skin cold. From the mist of the sea below, her body turned downward, and at the bottom of the cliff got closer and closer. It all seemed so real. She could hear Matthew's voice laughing, but in a way it wasn't him. Suddenly Evie felt her body hit the rock, which jolted her awake in the bed, horrifying her. She felt out of breath, sweetly terrorized by this latest awful nightmare. She wondered of in her dream why Matthew had pushed her. She clutched her heart that was pounding in her chest. She got up slowly and walked over to Gabriel's tiny bed. Said he was asleep. He didn't hear a thing. More evidence to me of the baby's deafness. She was sure he would have woken with her scream. Far off in her room on Good Island's single cabin to the which from Highsgrove, Jacqueline Gary sat cross-legged on the floor with her eyes closed. On sorry, eyes closed and her hands clasped on her knees inside a large circle of glowing white candles. She had pushed Evie off a cliff. She had caused the nightmare again to haunt Evie's mind as she slept. It was her laugh Evie heard, not Matthew's. She wanted to push Evie to the brink of madness in hopes to get her out of the way and out of Sebastian's mind. But Sebastian's heart was not as innocent and pure as Jacqueline thought. It was true that he loved Evie, but he had let her live her life with Matthew. What's more, she believed him dead after the fire of Lockwood Thicket that killed Alice Winterbourne. Sebastian had moved on too with Jacqueline, but he felt as if their connection was tainted. Who they were, what they were, made Sebastian feel unnerved. When there was what Jacqueline said of his cousin Mary's betrayal, the horrible truth about the protection spell gone wrong, turned his slowly warming heart to a block of ice, and his mind was set fighting reality and feeling guilty of ever even asking Mary for help in the first place. Now his son's silence was on Sebastian's conscience. It hurt him most of the that Mary and Philip, his only friends in the world, would lie to him and kept Sebastian from knowing the truth about the air and the protection spell on Gabriel all along. But Jacqueline knew too. She had agreed to the same pain of keeping Sebastian out of the loop. A fact, but she purposely neglected to tell Sebastian. Jacqueline lit the match that would blow up the relationship between Sebastian and everyone he loved to further alienate him, to push him closer to her. He looked down at his boots as he stood outside in the snow in the middle of the night and saw the carcass of 4 rabbits and 1 deer, with its throat ripped out open and its choked on its own blood. Sebastian was so distraught over his son and everything that was being kept from him made him go into the state of where he blacked out when he fed. He didn't remember anything past the second rabbit. He looked at his hands and they were drenched in blood. He looked at his pants the same. He glanced at himself in a frozen puddle of his entire face was stained with blood of the animals he killed to feed on. He fell to his knees and buried his blood-red face into the blood-stained hands and cried. How could everyone he loved do lie to him? How could he have asked for help in protecting his child? Then they do the opposite to take his hearing from him and then lie about everything. Such a cruel way for a child to start his life. In truth, Mary, Philip, and Jacqueline felt horrible about Gabriel and were afraid Sebastian would lose his mind should he know the truth. And they were right. His vampirism left him volatile and irrational. Sebastian's inability to think things through before reacting was the true Achilles' heel. But Jacqueline took advantage of this volatile to her own gain and turned Sebastian against Mary and Philip. She needed to keep herself in a better place than her lie. She had nothing to do with any of the cover up. This was a this was a war where lies and secrets were the ammunition. There would be a death count, but the number of casualties would be the biggest shock of all. All right, guys. Really, really, really good. I'm sort of curious as to like David being in darkness. There could be a lot there. I don't know about vampire, but he could be underground fighting. Well, I don't know. We'll see. We'll see. Um, Link to Benight Beguile is going to be in the description box. Go check it out, guys. It's really, really good. When shadows gather, I'll see you guys later.